Good afternoon. Just here doing my review for Joy's paper and where she looked at sort of the function of the priesthood of Christ in Hebrews and compared that to some passages in Psalms. So it was an excellent paper overall. I learned a lot. Really appreciated reading it, Joy. And one of the I just highlighted something here for my review. Basically, the overarching purpose of the paper. The picture that will emerge from this study is one of a triumphant priestly king whose work is finished and yet always ongoing on behalf of the believer before the Lord. So I thought that was pretty good, and I think it's just a great topic. She really highlights that we think a lot about Christ as Messiah and King and Prophet, but it's really Hebrews that is the book that brings this out the most in the New Testament, and she delves into historical background for the role of the priest in the Old Testament, which is very helpful, and then uses that as a foundation to describe how the New Testament readers were and authors were understanding Christ in that function as a high priest based on their understanding of the priesthood from the Old Testament. So, overall, very well done. Lots of good things to say, but just for the nature of this quick review, a couple thoughts that I had, and I don't know if I'd really call these critiques because I'm not necessarily critiquing as much as I am just thinking out loud and just asking questions that come to my mind, right, wrong, or indifferent, in regards to the paper. Um, she talks about Melchizedek, of course, which you'd have to on this topic, but and she views Melchizedek as a historical figure, which I think I'd probably agree with that. But I'm just wondering, what does it look like if Melchizedek was a theophany? Um, we see these different things. Jacob wrestling with the angel and that sort of thing. It's just Melchizedek's very strange. He just sort of comes out of nowhere and is functioning as a priest. And how does he even know how to do all that? So it's just strange. And and to what extent, is he this pre-incarnate Christ functioning person? I don't know. Like I say, I'm not saying I agree with that position, but if you would take that position, how would it affect what Hebrews may be understanding? That's a question I have. And I do qualify, you can't deal with every single issue in a paper this size, so I get that. So I'm not saying she even had room to deal with that. Um, so in terms of thinking about things like Psalm 2 and Psalm 110, which are two of the major ones she deals with, clearly they're prophetic, but in what sense are they prophetic? That's a question I have. Are they, you know, prophetic in a typological sense? And even if I say that, what does that mean? What is prophecy in a typological sense? So it could perhaps maybe delve into a little more in what sense they're prophetic, and if they are prophetic in a typological sense, which she sort of hints at in her paper. I mean, she does use the word type here and there. What does that fully mean, or how do we define that? How do we use that appropriately? These are just questions that I have even personally as I continue to work through this stuff. Um, there were some other areas of typology in Hebrews. There's Psalm 22:22 applied to Christ typologically in Hebrews 2:12, or 2 Samuel 7:14 to Hebrews 1:5. So and there's lots of different areas of typology in the book of Hebrews. Even beyond the two Psalms. So that's just a large overarching theme with Hebrews, and how's it working there. If we understand typology as like a figurative language of comparison of sorts, um, it just this idea that there was some sort of historical reality in the first portion that's then compared to a later time in terms of application. What does that all mean? So that's one big thing for me. I mean, from our past conversations in class, that I like to understand some sort of original setting for these things. So I need to understand Psalms 2 in the original context and then work from there. Not saying she didn't do that, but I'm just speaking out loud thoughts that I have in general. And then I also said, talking about Christ's role as high priest, would we mention anything about Hebrews 6:6? And here again, limitations of the paper. I get it, you can't deal with everything. But this being like a massive warning passage issue in Hebrews, and in Hebrews 6:6, because to their loss they are crucifying the Son of God all over again, kind of speaking to this act of Christ being the atoning sacrifice, then that, in a sense, you know, influencing his role as priest potentially. So I think that there's some connections there that could potentially be made. Um, and lastly, I've been heavily influenced by Dr. Arthur Woods at LBC when I was in undergrad there, like what, 15 years back, 17 years back. I and he holds the position that Hebrews was written to the Jews saved under the old covenant by faith in the coming Messiah. So that it's written to like Jews saved under the old covenant. I think that's at least a very interesting theological position, and one that might have a lot of bearing on this conversation potentially. Rather than viewing the book as written to, you know, Gentile and Hebrew believers or second generation Christians, could this be a possible audience to consider? But it's speculative. I mean, we can theologize about these things, but there's no way to know for certain. So, I say in overall conclusion, the foundation Joy lays for the priesthood in the Old Testament is very helpful in understanding her points in Hebrews. And I think the major thing that Joy does, which is really great, is not only does she show how the priesthood of Christ is being viewed in Hebrews, but then she takes it further and sort of draws that back into possible ways that the New Testament on whole is specifically alluding to this idea of Christ as high priest. And I thought that's very good. Um, and she is, I would say, she's very humble about her conclusions, and yet they're very valid conclusions in my mind. I think she has something there, and it makes sense to me to think that even though Hebrews is really specifying this for some reason, perhaps the original audience, um, it's not foreign, completely foreign to the rest of the New Testament, and then she's drawing some great ideas about allusions that are seen there. So that's my review, and great job again. Appreciated reading it. It's a good read. Everyone should read it if they have a chance. So, all right, take care, guys. We'll see you soon.